Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the video podcast series on the Seven Stories Bible Study class, which we're calling Stories with Tony and Linda. Today is the seventh or the second from last of the series of 8 videos. And this one we are focusing on the sixth of the 7 stories called The Temple to its Deconstruction. Now, when we studied the land, we mentioned that identity with the land is one of the 2 shells within which all human cultures have developed. And the temple is the other one, the one we're focusing on today. So, Tony, can you start by explaining a bit about why we see the temple as this second shell?
Yeah, so it's obvious that for any human group to exist, they have to have a land. They have to have some area in which they live and which the produce of this land will support them. But just as crucially in the existence of a community is the temple. And it's just this strange truism of human history that there is no human culture anywhere in the world without temple and altar. Even in religious cultures that have gone beyond sacrifice, you'll still find the existence of sacrifice in their cultural roots. And indeed, in many cases, there is in popular practice in, say, for example, Buddhist countries, there's still temple ritual practiced. So there is this existence of the temple in all humanity, and it leads you to think automatically there's something that's happening here, which is essential to the construction of a human community. And with Gerard, we see how, yes, the explanation for that is that the sacrifice of an animal, and in the controlled, ordered ritual circumstances of a temple, the killing of that animal discharges the dysfunctions and the conflicts of a group on that creature. It's like almost like a mechanical, physical thing that this creature polarizes the conflictive energies of a group, and thereby peace is restored. And if that's ordered also as a religious cosmos, you see how enormously important the idea of the God who's receiving this, who accepts the sacrifice, in whose name the sacrifice is made, etc. This creates a world for the people. So we then understand what an enormously radical thing it was for Jesus to do, to basically shut down the temple, in John's gospel, to drive out the animals, to make sacrifice impossible. He was overturning one of the central pillars, or as we say, the shell construct of existence. So obviously he has to put something really just as powerful, more powerful in its place. And we'll get to that in our discussion.
Okay, so we've already said that before when we studied the Exodus that the foundational act of the Israelite story was that Exodus experience. So when and why was the Israelite temple first built?
Yeah, I mean, we made a big play of that Exodus is the foundation story, the frame story of the Israelite people, the Jewish people. So why would they need a temple? Well, this is very interesting that they, in fact, don't have a temple initially. They have altars, yes, but a central location of a cult and a religion is not there until the King David. It comes online with the monarchy and with their greatest dynasty founding figure of David. He decides that God needs a temple in which to be worshipped. His God, the God of Israel, needs a temple for worship. And that seems to be initially what he's going to do. But then his prophet, Nathan, comes to him and says, well, it's not necessary. God doesn't want a temple because and he says, did I have a home and like a temple when I was with you wandering in the wilderness all those years, or when I was with you and you were basically an outlaw, and I was wandering with you in the wilderness. And so the prophet returns David to the basic founding experience of the Israelites, which is the desert experience of being just shepherded and educated person, say in a person to person, a very personal way by God in the desert. And the temple, in some ways, negates that. And so David is told to hold off, but then at the same time, it says, well, you won't build a temple, but your son Solomon will.
Right. Okay. So,
And of course, it's almost like this is relentless energy in the kings, and especially the kings as they're approaching their peak of power. Solomon is the greatest of the kings in terms of his power and prestige. He is inevitably going to build a temple.
okay, so there is this tension in the book of Samuel that you mentioned about the establishment of the temple, but later on, this tension seems to disappear.
Right. So, as I say, David holds back from building a temple, and his son Solomon, builds a temple and dedicates it in the first book of Kings. And so Solomon has this enormous prestige, both in terms of the extent of his kingdom and his wisdom, and then building the temple. But then later on in the writing of the Bible, in the books of Chronicles, which come after the exile, and like the court records of David, which are before the exile, the books of Chronicles come towards the end of the biblical period, the composition of the Bible. And what they do is they kind of retell the story so that David is no longer this kind of shadowy figure behind the temple who in some ways negates it. No, it equates David completely with the building of the temple, and the role of Solomon is reduced. So David becomes the person who purchases the property, he's the architect. He plans the building. He assembles the materials, and he creates the ritual order of the temple, establishing the role of the Levites and the priests, etc., etc. So in Chronicles, David grows massively as the symbolic founder of the temple. And why is that? It's because after the return from exile, the temple has equivalently grown. The monarchy no longer exists. They are governed by these imperial nations beyond them, and the sole remaining institutional edifice and symbol of the identity of the people is the temple. And so, rooting together the history of Israel and the temple serves of creating this unitary account of who they are, and it's an institutional account that strengthens the social system of that period and the identity of the Jewish people in that period.
Okay. So in the text, we talk about temple theology. Can you explain what temple theology is?
So yes, that's another very important angle of the discussion. I mean, if human beings have a temple, there's going to be something going on there that's very important. And we've already suggested what that is. It's the killing of the animal to discharge the dysfunction of the group on that poor unfortunate creature.
And that's Gerard's.
And that's Gerard's account. But looking at it slightly more
from the people who are going there, the people who are sacrificing, they're not going to think, I'm doing this to discharge my violence.
No, they're not. It's something incredibly holy. And if you went to the Jerusalem temple and experienced the sacrifices there, and especially at Passover, it would have been an enormously impressive experience with all the animals and their cries and the kind of summary execution of these creatures at the altar, and the ferrying of the bits and pieces of the animals and the wood necessary for the Holocaust fire. All that it was a production, but at its heart lay this experience of the holy, which is associated with sacrifice. And it brings awe and terror and wonder and fascination all in one. It's a deeply religious event. And you can see how the Jewish people would have found it very difficult, as any people did, to live without that. And so you have this parallel stream. You have the story of the foundation of the people in the Exodus, and the law and the covenant that they have with God, and yet this religious practice of a temple instituted by the kings, David and then especially Solomon and the kings afterwards.
So there's this tension between the temple and the prophets. The prophets, for them, the covenant and the faithfulness to the law was the central thing.
Right.
For the kings, it was more of the ritual. I mean,
it was the order and the prestige of their kingdom that they counted.
And so the prophets, as we said, criticized the temple right at the very beginning with Nathan, saying that this wasn't necessary.
Yeah, right.
That if you want to do it, go ahead.
Yeah.
And then later on, throughout the prophetic tradition, there's always been this witness against the temple. Can you talk to us a little bit about what they said?
Yeah, so that's the wonderful thing about the biblical story, is that even as Israel develops into a nation like all the other nations with its king and its army, you have the existence of these prophets. Some of them are attached to the king, as in the case of Nathan. Others just appear spontaneously. But there's this steady and really powerful note of criticism issuing from the prophets all through the history, the main history of Israel as a kingdom, Israel and Judea. And they have this very serious critique, kind of damning critique of the temple. And that's a sustained note and message throughout the biblical story. So you obviously have a very classic tension here between the kind of temple religious practice and the voice of the prophet, who's defending and seeks to defend the authentic covenant relationship of the heart and behavior, personal practice of the people and their relationship with God that demands that.
Could you read from the Bible?
Yes.
One or two of those. Give us an example of, say, one of the 8th century, one of the earlier prophets.
Yeah. So to illustrate this, we have readings in the 7 stories of the utterances of the prophets, and we have here where is it? Amos.
Yeah.
And Amos is probably the first of them that is recorded in the 8th century, as Linda says. In the 8th century, is the time of the peak power of the kings and the most resonant voices of the prophets against the kings. So this is what Amos says in chapter 5. He says, and he's speaking in the name of God, the God of Israel, I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals, I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You know, that's absolutely classic statement by Amos. And you can read similar things in Hosea. For I desire, this is from Hosea, I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. And that quotation, I desire steadfast love, translated as mercy, is picked up twice in the Gospel of Matthew. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. That kind of sums it up.
So very frequently, however, in the commentaries, we read these critiques as saying, I want you to reform your behavior and then your sacrifices will be acceptable.
Right. So that would be
this doesn't seem to be really what's going on.
No, you could see there's a more profound tension, there's a more profound kind of religious sense of opposition to sacrifice there in these prophets. But that is the major nature of the commentaries, the footnotes you get in the Bible said, yeah, the prophets were against the practice of the temple and of sacrifice when the covenant was not being observed. If they were to be observed the covenant and to be faithful members of the covenant, then yeah, sacrifice would be okay. So it wasn't either or; it was both together. But when you get to someone like Jeremiah in chapter 7, he flat out prophesies and threatens the destruction of the temple. So you get to the point where the prophet says it's not reform that's going to happen, but it's going to be outright destruction.
Can you give an example? For example, one of the later prophets where it seems like this becomes clearer as the prophets.
Right. So Jeremiah prophesies the destruction of the temple, and that actually happens with the Babylonian invasion at the beginning of the 6th century before Christ. And then with the return, the writer of Second Exile, Isaiah, after the return from exile, he does not mention the temple, except you get a mention then in the what is then called Third Isaiah. It's the further writings of the Isaiah kind of prophecy community that says this. I mean, it flat out equates sacrifice with murder. And it's difficult not to read it this way. It says in chapter 66, what is the house that you would build for me? And what is my resting place? God is asking these questions. And then whoever slaughters an ox is one who kills a human being. That's the literal Hebrew. Someone who slaughters an ox, the greatest animal of sacrifice, is a murderer. It's someone who's killing a human being. And whoever sacrifices a lamb, one who breaks a dog's neck. Now, a dog is an impure animal. It would be a blasphemy to bring it inside a temple, let alone sacrifice it. And the lamb was the pure object, the pure victim of sacrifice. And the prophet says, you're sacrificing a lamb, and you think this is a good religious thing to do. You're actually breaking a dog's neck in honor of, supposed honor of God.
So that prophet Isaiah, the third Isaiah there, equates sacrifice with murder and violence.
Right.
And of course, Jesus acts completely and entirely on this principle and follows this through in his action in the temple. So this does bring us now to the third lesson in this cycle, which is Jesus's take on the temple. And traditionally, this has been called the cleansing of the temple by Jesus. But what you're saying he was doing was something very different.
Right. So you go to any Bible, and these passages in the Gospels will be kind of headlined the cleansing of the temple. And immediately you're giving a very decisive interpretation of what's happening. In other words, Jesus is cleaning up the temple. It's a reform action on Jesus's part. But if you read the text carefully, that's not what's happening at all. And the reason why you get this is because you get this interpretation is because, again, temple is so central to human practice. And it's inconceivable to many religious figures and leaders that humanity can conduct its affairs without some kind of temple system. And so even the Gospels, with their accent on the money exchange and the buying and selling in the temple, you turn my father's house into a marketplace. In some ways, they deflect attention from basically the cancellation of sacrifice that Jesus is bringing about. So there's this embarrassment, even in the Gospels, and then definitely in later interpretation about Jesus' action in temple. What Jesus was doing was enormously radical, and it fits entirely with his bringing about something entirely new in human existence and in human relationships through his totally non-violent self-giving.
So is there some passage in those stories that gives you the clue that Jesus wasn't just sorting out the people? It wasn't just all about money and the taint of money. Is there other passages in the text?
Right. So if you either both the two greatest witnesses are Mark and John, and if you look at Mark, yes, he overturns the tables of the moneylenders, but then it adds this note in chapter 11, verse 10, I think it is, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. Now, the way that's translated, and the way I've just said it, is the way it's translated. It seems a very trivial remark, and it seems like Jesus is concerned with order and solemnity in the temple. So everything must be like a funeral or something, where
it's obviously not the case when there are sacrifices.
Oh yeah, there's all the mayhem of
sacrifice,
and
people everywhere,
blood and smoke and noise, as you say.
It's not like walking into a cathedral.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the impression that it gives, that that he wants to have a hushed cathedral environment in the temple. No, but the actual verse says he would not allow anyone to carry a vessel through the temple. It's not anything, a bit of anything, a piece of material. It's a vessel, it's a container. And this is a technical term in the books of Kings and elsewhere, in Hebrews as well. A vessel is one of the necessary bits of apparatus that allows sacrifice to continue. It's a bucket, it's a shovel, it's a bowl in which you're going to carry the bits and pieces of the animals that have been left over in the communion sacrifices, all the wood and the cinders. I mean, think about all that burning going on in the altar of Holocaust. There would have been a lot of cinders to carry out, etc., and you would need shovels for them. Jesus broke the production line by not allowing anybody to carry a vessel through the temple. So it's very evident that he's interfering not with the commercialization of the temple, even though that certainly exists, and money and sacrifice do go together. It was the kind of financial headquarters of Jerusalem at the time, and there is that implication. But deeper still is Jesus' attack or confrontation with sacrifice itself. And then it becomes even more evident in John's gospel.
Okay, so what does John say about
sacrifice? Well, John has Jesus driving the animals out. And without the animals driven out, without the animals and the animals driven out, obviously you cannot have sacrifice. And John's gospel shows this as a deliberate, premeditated act on Jesus' part, because he plats, that's the word, he plats a whip of cords. And a whip has to be something like 7-8 feet, it has to be long enough to crack and make that noise which is going to drive the animals out.
Just like an early animal activist.
Yeah.
So this particular passage has often been, quoted that as proof that Jesus could be violent and could get angry.
Angry.
And it sounds like he the way that they
it's like
that he suddenly had a outburst of rage and started whipping all the animals.
Yeah, he says Jesus says reaches for his Kalashnikov. Okay, I've had it now. I'm gonna blow this place up.
Actually, when you say that he took the time to plait the cord, which would have taken several minutes, if not longer.
Oh yeah.
And then cracked the whip, and as we know with animals, it's the sound of the crack. It's not actually the whip doesn't touch the animals. In fact, if it did, it would probably create more mayhem. It's the sound of the crack of the whip that
or less mayhem
drives the animals away.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to hurt an animal that size, but it's the sound of the whip, which is that sound is the sound of the whip exceeding the speed of light. It's like breaking the sound barrier, so you get that unnatural crack, which spooks the animals.
So this was a measured action.
It was a measured, decisive, prophetic action on Jesus' part. He uses natural physics, the sound of a whip, to panic the animals, but effectively drive them out. And he's not hurting anybody. He's actually getting rid of, or he's kind of setting free. He's liberating the animals who are necessary for the sacrifice. They're not going to be there anymore. They're going to be driven out, and therefore sacrifice will come to an end. So it cannot be read as it's foolish to read it as an act of Jesus just losing his temper. He's prophetically and physically in the period while he does it. It's not going to last more than 45 minutes, an hour, but it's enough to impress itself upon the writers of the Gospels. This was a serious action on Jesus' part, and then of course his enemies, they understood what he was doing, and as the Gospels tell us, is at that point they decided to put him to death. He's gone too far. He's taking over the core of our religious power and authority. So Jesus has decided to do this, and with its extremely serious consequences, and it has a profound, enduring meaning. It's not him becoming piqued at the high priests.
So it's like similar to Jeremiah breaking the pots, Ezekiel lying down beside a model of the city.
Yeah.
These are physical prophetic actions that have a great sign value.
Yeah. So huge sign value. And then Jesus goes one step further, because he engages the actual apparatus of the temple by interfering with it. I mean, it's more than just externally symbolic. It's internally symbolic and extremely disruptive.
Right. So, I mean, just interfering or cleaning up of the temple would not be enough to get him killed. But when you start interfering with that deep-rooted, almost unconscious, subconscious need that's deeply embedded in all human beings for this sacrificial system, like Gerard tells us, that becomes incredibly dangerous and subversive.
And in an enormous, humanly subversive at a degree that we're still trying to understand.
So if we talk about how temple is so central to human culture, according to Gerard, if Jesus is shutting the temple down, at least symbolically and temporarily, what is he putting in its place?
Yes, so if Jesus didn't have something to put in his place, what he would be doing in the temple would be purely anarchic and destructive. And of course, Jesus is a healer and a figure of immense wisdom. There has to be something that he's replacing external temple violence with. And that's obviously symbolized, a further symbolic act, which is intimately connected in time and in the space of time where all this occurs in the last days of his life on earth, with the last, what is known as the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, in which he takes elements of the meal, the bread and wine, and says, take this. This is my body, my blood. Eat this, drink this in memory of me. That is, in bringing me to mind.
So just to clarify, the Eucharist is not just a reinvention of sacrifice.
Well, that's been the wonderful trick that that the Christian tradition has carried out, and you can understand why it's done that. That this is a supreme sacrifice. They get some of that reading that language from the book of Hebrews, but it doesn't use that objective terminology. And so the tradition has said that, and that this is a sacrifice offered to God, and it's the one that is truly pleasing to God and puts God at rights with us, so God is no longer angry.
So that's the old atonement theories we were talking about at the beginning, that you needed to have the perfect sacrifice to appease this violent God.
Right.
But what Jesus was doing was very different.
Very, very different, because in a sacrifice, you're discharging the violence of the collective group on the passive victim, the animal. And then in the sacrificial theology that has resulted, God becomes a figure of that collective violence. It's God's violence being discharged on the animal. But in fact, what Jesus does is take the act of violence, and as an agent, he's the one who's experiencing the violence, but then he acts with that violence in terms of forgiveness and non-violence, non-retaliation, to transform its meaning. So he acts from within. He doesn't redirect the violence. He takes it, as you could say, absorbs it, but he transforms its meaning by changing it into self-giving and what we know as love, as agape.
And that breaks the cycle of violence.
It totally breaks the cycle of violence, and at the same time declares the character of God. He said, if you have seen me, you've seen the Father. Mm-hmm. So what Jesus is doing is not an action directed at God to make God appeased or satisfied in relationship to our sins, but it's actually a communication, a revelation, a disclosure of who God really is. And so Jesus takes the whole human practice of violence, first of all, in the story, shutting down its institutional religious form in the temple, and then surrendering to the authorities, the Roman authorities, the enactors of military and civil violence, and using all that to display the infinite non-violence of God in the world. So that then becomes this incredibly powerful new element in human experiences, is take this and eat it, assimilate it into yourself, eat it. That's what we do when we eat food. We make it part of ourselves and it becomes ourselves. Well, eat this and let this become you, so you'll become a new kind of human being in the world. And of course, Christians across the ages have done that, no matter what the interpretation has been. The kind of temple theology attached to the Last Supper, people have experienced that as the transformation of their inner being, and they've gone out into their lives always practicing the communication, the revelation of divine forgiveness and nonviolence.
Great. And so when Jesus gives himself not to God in that sacrificial sense, but rather he's giving himself to us.
To us.
And we by eating the bread and the wine, we enter into that relationship with him and through him with the Father. And we begin to understand God through Jesus's eyes of nonviolence.
Right.
And Jesus, of course, learned that from the Father.
Yeah, I mean, if we say that he's not offering this to the Father but to us, it still is, that doesn't negate the immense relationship with the Father that's going on in that action. There is a pouring out of self as love. Jesus says in the Garden of Gethsemane, may this cup pass from me, but not my will, but your will be done. So he's at the same time as he is giving himself to us, he's giving himself to his Father, but not in that kind of compensatory, violent sense that we've understood, but in terms of absolute love.
Right, because when he says, not your will, not my will, but your will be done, Jesus is so in love with the Father.
Yeah.
Where the Father goes, he will go.
Yeah, right.
And so if it's the Father's will to go to the cross, then Jesus will go to the cross.
Yeah. And that's the mystery. I mean, that's what Jesus finds it very difficult at that point to cope with, but he does surrender to it.
And so in Matthew's Gospel, just to close, Jesus says about himself, something greater than the temple is here. And of course, he carries out that self-giving ultimately on the cross with a physical surrender on the cross, which is his absolute self-giving nonviolent act. And that is like the culmination of that, which starts with the shutting down the interfering with the temple sacrifices, the replacement with the Last Supper of this new thing, replacing it with love, basically, and then living it, following that through to the end with the cross, and then the Father, because of that intimate relationship, validating it through the resurrection.
That's right.
So thank you for being here with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Check out our website if you haven't already, which is bethanyscenter.community, and we'll see you
for our last cycle, our last story next time.
Thank you.